Dad told me I wasn't invited on the family trip, but he didn't know I booked it all. A dad telling his own daughter she had no place on a vacation meant to bring people together. It still feels unreal when I say it out loud. The text came late at night, sharp and cold, the kind that makes your heart clench before your mind even catches up. He said the trip would be simpler if it was just for his new family. With one sentence I was erased, written out of something I had built with my own hands. My name is Ruby Favreau. I am 34 years old, and when I read those words I sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room like an echo. Memories of being overlooked, of holidays passed without a call, of birthdays blurred into nothing came rushing back. I thought this trip would be different. I thought maybe we could start over. But in that moment it became clear I had been mistaken. Still, there was something he didn't realize, something he had overlooked. He believed he held the power, that he could simply cast me aside. But sitting alone in my kitchen that night, I knew the truth was very different, and I knew I had a choice to make. Would I quietly accept his decision, or would I remind him, in the clearest way possible, just how wrong he was? It was a little after 8 on a Friday evening when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I remember I was folding laundry in my small Sacramento apartment, trying to keep my mind occupied after a long week at the law office. I thought maybe it was my mom checking in, or Carmen reminding me of our brunch plans for the weekend. I never expected that one short message would break something inside me. The screen lit up with my dad's name. For a second I felt a rush of warmth, the kind of reflex a daughter still carries even after years of distance. I tapped open the message. It was only a single line. "You will not be coming on this trip. This is for my real family now." I froze. My hands trembled, the laundry slipping through my fingers and landing in a heap on the floor. My dad, Anthony Favreau, had never been subtle, but this was cruel in a way that cut bone deep. I stared at those words, blinking hard as if my eyes were betraying me. Real family. What did that make me, an outsider? A mistake. I dropped onto the edge of the bed, my heart thudding in my chest. For a moment, the apartment was too quiet, the tick of the wall clock loud in my ears. I thought of the trip to Hawaii I had spent months organizing. I had envisioned warm sand and sea breezes, all of us together. My dad, his new wife Cheryl, her son Ethan, my mother, even though she was no longer married to him, and me. A rare gathering that might finally bridge years of wounds. But as I sat there staring at the message, the truth crashed in. He had no intention of including me. He had taken my effort, my money, my hopes, and tossed them aside like they meant nothing. The tears came hot and unrelenting. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, but it was no use. I had wired over $28,540 for flights, a luxury resort in Maui, guided tours, even a special dinner cruise. Every booking had been done carefully, with me listed as the primary contact. I wanted everything perfect because deep down, I believed this trip might heal something broken between us. I remembered the way my dad had spoken when we first discussed it. He had leaned back in his chair at Cheryl's house, saying he wanted a family trip. His eyes had flickered toward her and Ethan with pride, while his glance at me had been almost perfunctory. But I told myself not to dwell on it. I convinced myself that being generous would change how he saw me. That if I proved I could be the glue, maybe he would stop holding me at arm's length. My phone chimed again. This time it was not a message, but a Facebook notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. My dad had posted a photo. Cheryl stood smiling beside him in a floral dress, Ethan with his baseball cap tilted backward. The caption read, "Counting down to our dream trip to Hawaii. Family time at its best. Family time, not a single mention of me." My stomach twisted. It was as if I had been erased, written out of my own story. I hurled the phone onto the bed and paced the room. My breath came in ragged pulls, my body restless with anger and grief. The carpet felt rough under my bare feet, the walls closing in. I thought about the years of being left behind, of my dad missing birthdays, of him choosing Cheryl's comfort over my presence. And now here it was, laid bare for the world to see. I was not part of his family, not in the way he wanted. For a while I let myself sink into the hurt. I cried until my throat burned and my chest ached. I kept thinking about how easily he had typed those words, how little pause there must have been before pressing send. It was final, cold. But as the hours passed, something began to shift. I walked back to the bed, picked up the phone again, and scrolled through my confirmation emails. Each one had my name printed clearly. Passenger 1, Ruby Favreau. Reservation holder Ruby Favreau. Payment authorized under my account. A different kind of energy sparked inside me. The kind that stiffens your spine when someone pushes you too far. He might believe he held the power, but in reality, every single ticket, every single reservation belonged to me. Without me, they had nothing. I whispered to myself, almost afraid of the thought. What if I just stopped it all? What if I froze the transactions, canceled the bookings, reclaimed the money? The idea flickered like a flame in the dark. Dangerous, maybe reckless, but it carried a weight of justice I could not ignore. I paced again, this time with a sharper rhythm. My mind raced through logistics. The flights were non-refundable, but because I was the account holder, I could cancel and redirect the funds. The resort policy allowed for a full refund up to 24 hours before check-in. The guided tours were all prepaid through my travel fund account that was linked directly to my bank. I had control every step of the way. I sat back down, clutching the phone to my chest, my breath unsteady. Images of their faces at the airport filled my mind. Cheryl with her perfect smile fading, Ethan scowling. My dad scrambling to call me when he realized nothing was working. I hated myself for picturing it, but I also felt a deep surge of vindication. For once, I would not be invisible. My hands still shook, but not from weakness anymore. This time it was adrenaline. The kind that surges when you decide enough is enough. I wiped my face, blew out a shaky breath, and began typing notes on my phone. Cancellation policies, banking freeze options, contact numbers. My mind sharpened, every detail falling into place. I stopped when I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. My eyes were swollen red from crying, but behind them burned something new, a resolve I had not seen in years. He had treated me like a shadow, a backup plan, a source of money. But this trip, this so-called family vacation, would not happen without me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of power settle into my bones. I did not smile. I did not celebrate, but I knew exactly what I was going to do. The night after my dad's message, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles. Sleep never came. My body was tired, but my mind refused to rest. Instead, it carried me backward, pulling me through memories I had worked so hard to bury. I found myself back in 2010, the year my parents finally divorced. I was 20 years old then, just starting to find my own place in the world. But I still needed the security of a family that felt whole. Instead, I watched everything split apart in slow motion. The shouting had started years earlier, muffled arguments behind closed doors. But by then the fights were louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. I would sit at the top of the stairs listening to my dad slam doors and my mother's voice crack from exhaustion. When the papers were signed, my dad moved out without a backward glance. I remember watching him pack the last of his clothes into a black duffel bag. I stood in the doorway, hugging myself tight, waiting for him to look at me. He never did. He brushed past me and muttered something about calling me soon. That call never came. The years that followed felt like a slow drifting. My mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the hospital to keep our house in Roseville. She came home exhausted, but always made time to ask about my classes, to make sure there was dinner on the table. She was my anchor. My dad became more like a shadow, appearing only when it was convenient, sending birthday cards that arrived late, sometimes with a check inside, as if money could stand in for his presence. Then in 2018, everything changed again. He remarried. Cheryl came into his life like a bright storm full of energy, always dressed in bold colors, her laughter loud at church gatherings. She had a teenage son, Ethan, who strutted around with the careless arrogance of someone who had never been told no. Suddenly, my dad was part of a new picture. At first, I wanted to be supportive. I told myself he deserved happiness too. But I could feel the distance widen. Phone calls became even rarer, visits awkward and short. The hardest part was watching the way he treated Ethan. He showed up to baseball games, shouted encouragement from the stands, and bought him new gear. I would sit there clapping politely, remembering all the birthdays and school plays my dad had missed for me. The contrast was sharp enough to cut. One afternoon in 2019, I stopped by his house unannounced. Cheryl answered the door, her smile tight. She stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into a living room decorated with framed photos of vacations I had never been invited to. My dad sat in an armchair, relaxed in a way I rarely saw him. Ethan sprawled on this couch beside him. They were laughing at some private joke. For a moment, I stood frozen, realizing I was the outsider in a home that should have included me. It was during that visit, my dad asked something that would stick with me. He said he wanted to start a travel fund for family trips, but his own credit score was not ideal. Could I open the account in my name? He framed it as a practical favor, told me it would just make things smoother with banks and agencies. I wanted so badly to believe this meant he was planning something for all of us, so I agreed. I remember signing the papers, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe he finally wanted me to be part of the picture. Looking back, I see it for what it was. He needed me only when I could provide. Over the years that followed, I carried the weight of that account like a secret burden. Every deposit came from me, not him. I cut corners, skipped vacations with friends, packed lunches instead of buying takeout, all so the balance could grow. I called it my dream jar in private. I told myself it would one day pay for a trip that would heal the fractures between us. But the reality was different. The more I saved, the less he reached out. Holidays passed with him seated at Cheryl's family table, while my mother and I ate in our quiet kitchen. He sent photos now and then, smiling with his new wife and stepson in places I had never seen. Each image was a reminder that I had been replaced. Still, I kept depositing. A part of me believed if I gave enough, if I offered something too good to refuse, he would have no choice but to bring me in. I wanted him to look at me with pride, to call me his daughter without hesitation. That longing shaped too many of my choices. There were nights when my mother found me at the kitchen table with my head in my hands. She would touch my shoulder gently and whisper that I didn't need to keep chasing after his approval. But I could never let go. It felt like if I stopped trying, then I would finally lose him for good. The bitterness grew quietly inside me. I learned to hide it, to smile politely when Cheryl spoke at church events, to nod when Ethan boasted about his new car that my dad had helped him buy. But every time I saw my dad invest in them while leaving me in the margins, a small crack opened deeper in me. By the time the idea of the Hawaii trip formed, I was desperate for something that could shift the tide. I told myself this would be the gesture that changed everything. If I funded the trip, if I took care of every detail, then he would finally see me as family again. I convinced myself that this was love, that this was how you proved loyalty. But lying awake that night after his cruel message, all the illusions shattered. I saw the pattern with clarity I had avoided for years. My dad had not just forgotten me. He had chosen to treat me like a shadow, useful only when I could offer something. Real family, he called Cheryl and Ethan. To him, I was never more than an afterthought. The memory of him asking me to use my credit score better than his replayed in my mind like a sour song. I realized it had always been about convenience, never about love. He had set the foundation for me to carry the burden, while he reaped the rewards. And I, blind with hope, had let it happen. As dawn crept through my curtains, I sat up in bed and pressed my palms together. My chest ached, but my eyes were dry. The tears had run their course. What replaced them was something heavier but steadier, a recognition of the truth. My dad had never seen me as enough. He never would. I looked around my small apartment, the walls plain, but mine, the shelves lined with law books I had bought myself. Every bit of stability in my life I had carved with my own hands, and still I had clung to the fantasy that one grand gesture could rewrite history. That morning I brewed coffee, the bitter steam rising into my face. I thought of my mother, the sacrifices she had made, the steady love she had offered without conditions. She had been my true parent all along, yet I had been consumed with chasing the one who discarded me. The irony stung. I took my mug to the window and watched the street below wake up. Cars pulled out of driveways, children walked with backpacks, the ordinary rhythm of life unfolding. For a moment I let myself breathe it in. I felt both smaller and stronger at once. Smaller because I was only one person trying to mend a wound too deep to close. Stronger because I finally admitted to myself that the wound existed. The trip to Hawaii was still booked. The account still sat under my name. The power, however fragile, was in my hands. I was no longer the little girl standing in a doorway waiting for my dad to look back. I was a woman who had been used and ignored, but who could still choose what happened next. The months leading up to the trip had been filled with lists, confirmations, and a quiet kind of hope I carried close to my chest. Between long hours at the law office and evenings spent balancing bills, I carved out time to plan every detail of what I thought would be a chance to bring us back together. I called it my dream jar come to life. I remember the moment I first clicked confirm on the flights. June 15th through June 25th, Sacramento to Honolulu. Then a short connection to Maui. 7 tickets in total. I stared at the final amount and felt my stomach flip, but I told myself it was worth it. This was not just a vacation. It was a chance to rewrite history, to remind my dad of the family he had before Cheryl. The resort confirmation arrived next. A place on Kaanapali Beach with wide balconies and rooms that opened onto the ocean. I pictured us gathered at sunset, the waves curling against the sand, maybe even laughter that felt easy for once. I booked guided tours, a snorkeling trip, and a dinner cruise that promised fresh seafood and island music under the stars. With each purchase, I felt lighter, like I was weaving together a net strong enough to catch what had always slipped through my hands. At work, I found myself daydreaming between briefs and depositions. Carmen would glance over sometimes, raising an eyebrow when she caught me sketching palm trees in the margins of my notes. I told her I was planning something special. She smiled, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She knew my history with my dad better than most. When I told my dad about the bookings, he barely reacted. He just nodded, muttered something about good timing, then turned the conversation toward what Cheryl wanted to see in Hawaii. I brushed it off. I told myself he was distracted, that once we were there, he would realize what I had done for him, for all of us. Cheryl's tone was harder to ignore. Whenever we spoke about the trip, she kept her answers short, clipped at the edges. She would say things like, "We will see," or "Ethan has his own plans." Her smile never quite reached her eyes. I felt as if she was waiting for me to stumble, for proof that I did not belong. Ethan was worse. He was in his early 20s by then, tall and confident, and he made little effort to hide his disdain for me. At family gatherings, he would glance at his phone when I spoke, smirk when I tried to join a conversation. Once, when I mentioned the snorkeling trip I had booked, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Maybe you should stick to the kiddie pool." My dad chuckled instead of correcting him. That laugh lodged in my chest like a stone. Still, I pressed on. I convinced myself that effort could outweigh coldness, that once we were all on the island, something would shift. I wanted to believe in second chances. Then one night, while sitting at my desk, I noticed an odd notification on my laptop. I had been added to a shared family folder for trip planning, but when I clicked through the files, I saw a group chat thread I was not supposed to access. At first, I thought it was harmless. Then I read the messages. The thread was filled with lines from Cheryl and Ethan, even from my dad. They were discussing itinerary changes, talking about trimming down the list of travelers, using phrases like cleaning up the guest list. My name was never mentioned directly, but the context was unmistakable. They were talking about removing me, quietly editing me out of the plans I had created. I sat frozen, my fingers hovering above the trackpad. My heart raced as if I had been caught in some terrible spotlight. My own dad was part of this conversation. He was not defending me, not once. He was helping them decide how to adjust the bookings so that I would be left behind. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing against my lungs. I scrolled further, each line cutting deeper. Ethan had written that it would be easier to relax without extra drama. Cheryl replied with a laughing emoji. And then my dad had written, "Let's keep this simple. Ruby doesn't need to know." I slammed the laptop shut so hard it rattled the desk. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I felt as though the ground had dropped from under me. Every dollar I had saved, every detail I had planned, was being twisted into a trip I was not even meant to attend. I staggered into the kitchen and gripped the edge of the counter. The cool tile beneath my palms grounded me but did not stop the flood of thoughts. How could he do this again? How could he let them talk about me like that? As if I were an inconvenience to be managed. The memory of his message days earlier returned with brutal clarity. "You will not be coming, real family. Now I understand." It was not a slip of anger. It was the truth of how he saw me. I poured myself a glass of water but barely touched it. Instead, I sank into a chair and stared out the window at the dark street. The quiet outside felt mocking. Inside my head, the voices of that chat echoed over and over. Hours passed. I replayed every choice I had made, agreeing to open that travel fund, cutting corners to save money, booking everything in my name with the hope it would make me indispensable. And still they had found a way to erase me. For the first time, I let the anger rise without shoving it down. It spread through me like fire, sharp and cleansing. If they wanted to cut me out, they would learn what it meant to build something on the foundation I had laid. By dawn, my decision had not fully formed, but the seed was planted. I could not keep begging for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I would not be erased quietly, not this time. The morning after I'd discovered the group chat, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in my hands. My head ached from a sleepless night. I kept seeing the words on the screen, the way my dad had written, that I did not need to know. My own dad is plotting to erase me as if I were nothing more than an unwanted guest. I needed answers. I needed to know what I could actually do. My fingers hovered over my phone until I finally scrolled to Carmen's name. She had been my friend since college, steady as a rock, and now she worked as a lawyer in Sacramento. If anyone could cut through the fog and tell me what power I held, it was her. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was groggy but warm. I told her I needed to see her and that it could not wait. She did not ask many questions. She just said to come by her office that morning. By the time I arrived, the sun was high and the city hummed with traffic. Carmen's office was tucked inside a brick building near downtown. I had been there once before for a small claims issue, but this felt entirely different. My legs trembled as I climbed the stairs. Carmen greeted me in the lobby with her usual calm smile. She wore a gray suit and her dark hair was pulled back neatly. She guided me into her office, closed the door, and gestured for me to sit. I barely managed a hello before the words tumbled out. I told her about the bookings, the money, the message from my dad, and finally the group chat I had stumbled across. By the time I finished, my throat was raw and my hands clenched tight in my lap. Carmen listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then. When I stopped, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. She asked me to clarify one detail: whose name was on the reservations. Mine, I answered. Every single one of them. The flights, the resort, the tours, the rental cars. I had paid with my own accounts, all linked to the travel fund under my name. Her eyes sharpened. Then she asked who had access to that fund. I told her only me. My dad had convinced me to open it years ago because my credit score was better, but he had never been added as an account holder. Carmen sat back slowly and folded her hands. Ruby, she said, that means you hold all the power here. You are the legal owner of every booking. You can cancel, reschedule, freeze the funds. They cannot force you to give them access. Not without your consent. I blinked at her, the words sinking in. For so long I had felt powerless, like a piece on a board moved at someone else's whim. Hearing it laid out so plainly shook me. She repeated it again. You have every right to shut this trip down. My throat tightened. The idea felt dangerous, heavy with consequence, but also thrilling in a way I could hardly admit to myself. I asked her if there would be legal trouble if I canceled. She told me no. The money was mine, the reservations were mine. They could complain, they could threaten, but they had no legal standing. I let out a long breath I had been holding since the night before. A strange calm settled in me, as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room. Carmen reached across the desk and touched my hand gently. You do not have to let them treat you like this. I nodded, but words stuck in my throat. It was not just about a trip. It was years of being overlooked, of being used when convenient and discarded when not. For once, I had something they could not twist away from me. We spent the next hour going over details. Carmen explained cancellation policies, the timelines, the safest way to move the funds back into my account. She reminded me that emotions might run high, that my dad could lash out. But legally, I was in control. When I left her office, the air outside felt different. The streets looked sharper, the colors brighter. I walked slowly to my car, replaying her words. You hold all the power. Back at home, I sat with my laptop open. I scrolled through the confirmation emails once more, but this time my eyes were steady. The option to cancel sat right there, one click away. My fingers itched to press it, but I decided to wait. I wanted them to feel secure until the last possible moment. I wanted them to pack their bags, check their boarding passes, walk into the airport certain of their plans. I opened my banking app and saw the linked travel account. Carmen had suggested I freeze it 24 hours before departure. That would be enough to trigger cancellations across the board. I picked up my phone and marked the calendar. June 14th, 9 in the morning. The day before their flight. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my dad. Do not make this difficult, he wrote. We will reimburse you later. Just let us enjoy this. My eyes stung. He still thought of me as an obstacle to manage a bank to borrow from, not as his daughter. The word later hung there like a cruel joke. Later had never come with him. He had promised later since I was a child, and later never arrived. I typed a reply but deleted it before hitting send. No words would change the truth. Instead, I closed my phone and let the silence fill the room. The day stretched on. I folded laundry, answered work emails, and tried to keep myself grounded. But every so often, my mind circled back to the plan. To the image of them standing at the airport, tickets in hand, only to be told nothing existed. I hated that part of me, relished the thought. But after years of swallowing hurt, a taste of justice felt intoxicating. That evening, I called my mother. I did not tell her everything, not yet, but I let her hear the steadiness in my voice. She said she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, even if she did not know all the details. I clung to that comfort as I hung up. Later, as night settled, I sat by the window with a notebook in my lap. I wrote down the timeline step by step. Freeze the account at 9. Cancel the resort immediately after. Double-check the tour confirmations. Make sure every cent flowed back to me. My handwriting was shaky at first, but steadied with each line. By the time I closed the notebook, I felt something I had not felt in years. Control. It was fragile, and I knew the storm ahead would be messy, but it was mine. When I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion washed over me. For once, I slept deeply. My dreams filled not with pleas for my dad's approval, but with the steady hum of ocean waves I would one day see on my own terms. The morning of June 15th arrived with a heavy stillness that clung to me the moment I opened my eyes. The sunlight streamed through my blinds, warm and golden, but it could not ease the weight pressing against my chest. This was the day. The day everything I had prepared for would unravel before them. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table staring at the clock. Their flight was scheduled to leave Sacramento International just after noon. By now, they would be on their way, probably loading suitcases into the trunk of my dad's car. I imagined Cheryl in her bright sundress, Ethan slouched in the back seat with his headphones, and my dad gripping the steering wheel with the self-assuredness of a man who believed he was in control. The phone sat beside me, silent and dark. I kept glancing at it, waiting. I told myself to be patient. The moment would come soon enough. At 11:30, the first call lit up my screen, Anthony. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A second later, another call, then another. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. His voice was sharp, urgent, already frayed around the edges. "Ruby, what have you done? The tickets are not working. The airline says the booking was canceled by the account holder. Call me back right now." I set the phone down and closed my eyes. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with release. By noon, the voicemails came one after another, his voice growing more frantic. "Con, do you hear me? We are at the counter. They are saying there is nothing they can do. Open the account. Put it back. This is ridiculous." Then another. "You think you are clever? Do you know how much money is at stake? We cannot even get boarding passes. They are saying all 7 tickets are void." I imagined them at the counter, the long line of impatient travelers behind them, the agent's polite but firm explanation. "Canceled by account holder. Refund in process, no exceptions." I rose from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the street was calm, neighbors tending to gardens, a delivery truck rumbling by. The contrast made the storm inside me even sharper. For once, I was not the one left humiliated. Around 12:30, my email chimed, a message from the resort in Maui. Reservation canceled per request. Full refund issued to the original payment method. I stared at the screen as the words blurred with sudden tears. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of vindication. It was real. Every piece of the trip was collapsing around them and returning to me. The phone buzzed again, louder now, as if demanding my attention. I picked it up this time, but did not answer. I pressed it against my chest, feeling the vibration pulse through me. When it finally stopped, I checked the voicemail. His voice had cracked into something raw. "Ruby, I am warning you. You cannot do this. We are stranded. Everyone is looking at me. Do you understand how this makes me look? Call me back. Fix this." The words made my stomach clench. Not once had he said how it made me feel. It was always about him, his image, his embarrassment. Even now, standing red-faced in the airport, he could only think about how others saw him. The messages from Cheryl began shortly after. Her tone was cutting sharp with blame. "How dare you ruin this? You are selfish, Ruby? Do you know what you have done to Ethan? He has been looking forward to this trip for months. You should be ashamed, ashamed." That word had been a constant companion in my life, whispered in subtle ways, implied in silences. But not today. Today the shame was not mine to carry. The final straw came when Ethan himself sent a message. It was short-typed without punctuation. "Nice job, loser. Hope you are happy." I almost laughed. The immaturity of it only confirmed everything I had known deep down. To them, I was never family. I was a convenience, a bank account, a name on a booking. By 1 o'clock, the calls slowed as if they realized I would not answer. I pictured them scrambling, maybe trying to buy new tickets at outrageous prices, maybe standing off to the side of the terminal with their luggage piled high. Whatever their next step, it would not include me. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me. My hands still trembled, the weight of years of longing and disappointment pressing to the surface. But beneath the trembling was something steadier. A quiet, unshakable certainty that I had taken back what was mine. The afternoon stretched long and silent after that. The phone stayed quiet, the flood of messages finally slowing. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was warm, the sky a bright blue that reminded me of the ocean I had hoped to see. I let the sun soak into my skin, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had finally stopped letting them hurt me. My phone lit up again just as the sun began to sink lower in the sky. I had ignored every call all afternoon, but this time the screen showed a video call request. For a moment, I considered letting it fade to silence like the others, but some part of me wanted to see their faces. I wanted to look directly at the people who had tried to erase me. I swiped to answer and propped the phone on the kitchen counter. My dad's face filled the screen, red and drawn with frustration. Behind him, I could see the blurry figures of Cheryl and Ethan, along with a few others from her side of the family. The background noise was unmistakable. The echo of the airport terminal announcements over the loudspeaker, the shuffle of travelers rolling luggage across polished floors. He wasted no time. "Ruby, what is this?" he barked. "Do you think this is funny? Do you have any idea what you have done to us?" Let him rant for a moment, my eyes steady on the screen. His voice grew louder, echoing with the weight of his anger. Cheryl appeared behind his shoulder, her lips pressed tight in a line before she leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "You ruined everything. Do you understand?" Ethan had his arms crossed, glaring at the camera with a look that carried more disdain than words ever could. I waited until the noise subsided enough for my voice to cut through. My words came out calm, measured, colder than I had planned. "If you think I am not part of the family, then you do not need my trip either." For a moment, silence hung heavy. My dad blinked, his mouth opening and closing before he found words again. His voice cracked with disbelief. "You dare speak to me like this, after everything I have done for you?" The laugh that bubbled in my chest surprised even me. I had heard that line too many times before. Everything he had done for me always meant the bare minimum. A card once a year, a check when guilt pressed hard enough, a phone call when appearances mattered. Meanwhile, he had poured his effort and money into another household, another child. Cheryl cut in sharply, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think this makes you look strong? It only proves you are petty and bitter. You embarrassed your dad in front of everyone." I met her gaze through the screen. "He embarrassed himself," I said quietly. The look on her face faltered just for a second, but Ethan jumped in quickly, leaning closer to the camera. "You will regret this," he said, his tone low and threatening. "People do not treat us this way." I tilted my head, studying his expression. "You already regret it," I replied. "You just do not know how to admit it yet." The noise in the background grew louder, an announcement for boarding echoing through the terminal. My dad's face twisted as he raised his voice once more. "You will undo this right now. Do you hear me, Ruby? You will restore every booking, every reservation. If you do not, I will take you to court. You cannot get away with this." His threat should have rattled me. For years, the idea of his anger had kept me compliant, kept me quiet. But standing there with the phone in my hand, the kitchen light casting shadows across my counter, I felt no fear. Carmen's words from days earlier echoed in my mind. "Everything is in your name. He has no case." So I let his threat hang in the air for a beat before I said what had been lodged in my chest for far too long. "Go ahead, try. But you will find nothing is yours to claim." The look on his face shifted then. Not just anger, but something raw, a flash of desperation. His eyes darted briefly toward Cheryl as if he needed her to steady him, but her lips were pressed so tight they were nearly white. For the first time, I wondered if cracks were forming between them too. He tried one more time, his voice dropping lower, almost pleading. "Ruby, you cannot do this to your own dad. Think about what you are doing." I leaned closer to the screen, my voice firm. A dad does not erase his daughter. A dad does not call her less than real family. Think about what you did. For a long moment, no one spoke. The background noise filled the silence, a boarding call echoing overhead. Then I pressed the red button and ended the call. The screen went dark in my hand, the silence in my apartment suddenly deep and complete. I sank into a chair, my legs trembling from the surge of adrenaline. My breath came fast, almost ragged, but underneath the chaos in my body was something steadier, a quiet strength that whispered I had finally said what needed to be said. The phone buzzed again moments later, another call, then another. I placed it face down on the counter and walked away. I would not be pulled back into their storm, not tonight. As the evening wore on, the silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a shield. I made myself a simple dinner, the motions slow and grounding. Each bite steadied me more, reminded me that life outside of their chaos still existed. The night grew darker, the city quieting outside my window. Yet the words from my dad lingered, circling in my mind. "I will take you to court." I knew he was blustering, desperate to regain control. Still, the threat carried weight. My chest tightened as I thought of the years of manipulation, the ways he had bent reality to suit his story. He would not hesitate to twist this too. I pushed the thought aside and tried to focus on the present. Tonight was not for fear. Tonight was for claiming the truth I had spoken out loud for the first time. If I was not family to him, then he was no longer dad to me. I washed my plate and set it carefully on the rack. My hands steadied as I dried the counter, as if reclaiming small order in my space was an act of defiance itself. By the time I sat back down with a glass of water, the shaking in my body had subsided. The calls eventually stopped. The phone lay silent. I stared at it, waiting for another buzz, but none came. The quiet felt like a curtain drawing down on the day, heavy but also final. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My chest rose and fell slowly, each breath deeper than the last. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I had faced him without shrinking. I had looked into his anger and found my own strength. Yet even as calm began to settle, a new question surfaced. Would he truly follow through on his threat? Would he drag me into court to reclaim a trip that had never been his to begin with? The thought hung there unresolved as the night deepened and shadows lengthened across the room. The Monday after that chaotic weekend, I found myself sitting in Carmen's office again, my nerves buzzing like power lines in a storm. I had not slept much since the video call. My dad's threats about court replayed in my mind every time I closed my eyes. Part of me believed he would do it not because he had a case, but because he would never admit defeat willingly. Carmen studied me across the desk, her expression calm but attentive. She wore a navy blazer this time, her hair swept neatly over one shoulder. She let me speak first. I told her everything about the video call, the threats, the way my dad had tried to twist the blame back on me. When I finished, she folded her hands and leaned slightly forward. Ruby listened to me carefully. He has no legal claim to those funds or the bookings. You are the sole account holder, the sole purchaser. If he tries to file anything, it will collapse the moment it reaches a judge. Her steady tone should have eased me, and in some ways it did, but the knot in my stomach remained. I told her I was tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop, tired of him holding the power through threats, even when the law was not on his side. Carmen nodded slowly, then pulled out a manila folder from a drawer. I had meant to show you this earlier, she said, but the timing never felt right. It was something she had uncovered when reviewing older family documents tied to property in Roseville. She slid the folder across the desk toward me. I opened it, my fingers brushing across the crisp edges of legal paper. At first, the words blurred together, my mind too restless to process. Then a phrase caught my eye. Last will and testament of Angelo Favero, my granddad, dated 2015. I scanned further, my pulse quickening. In clear language, the document left a portion of his estate, including investment shares and partial rights to a construction property, directly to me, not to my dad. To me. I looked up at Carmen, my throat tight. Why am I only seeing this now? She explained that after my granddad's passing, my dad had handled most of the estate matters, but the clause naming me had been filed with the county and never altered. It had simply been overlooked by me because I trusted my dad's version of events. Carmen's team had caught it while cross-referencing property records last week. The weight of it hit me all at once. All these years I had believed my dad held all the cards. Yet sitting here in my hands was proof that my granddad had chosen me for something meaningful, something lasting. Carmen's voice broke into my thoughts. Ruby, this changes everything. He has no leverage over you. In fact, if you wanted, you could press the matter of the estate and force him to answer for the way he managed things. My heart thudded in my chest. The idea of confronting my dad on something larger than a canceled trip was overwhelming, yet a strange sense of vindication flickered inside me. Maybe my granddad had seen the truth all along. Maybe he had known who could be trusted. I left Carmen's office with the folder tucked under my arm. The afternoon sun was glaring, but I barely noticed. I drove straight to my mother's house in Roseville, the small 2-story home she had fought to keep after the divorce. She opened the door with a smile that faltered when she saw the look on my face. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had once helped me with homework, where we had shared countless quiet dinners. I laid the folder down and explained what Carmen had told me. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for the papers. Her eyes moved carefully across the lines, and when she looked up, they were filled with tears. "Your granddad adored you," she whispered. "He always said you were the one with his determination. I think he wanted to make sure you were cared for, no matter what your dad chose." Her words cracked something open inside me. For years, I had felt like a shadow in my own family, like no one had truly seen me. But here was proof that at least one person had. I sat back in my chair, pressing my fingers to my temples. The anger and grief of the past week swirled with something steadier now, a sense of legacy of worth. My dad had tried to erase me, but my granddad had left a piece of himself in my hands. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You do not have to keep begging for his approval anymore. You never did." I swallowed hard, the truth of her words sinking deep. For so long I had chased scraps of affection, blind to the strength I already carried. Now the choice before me was clear. I could let my dad's threats continue to dictate my life, or I could stand firm, backed by both the law and the quiet love of someone who had believed in me all along. The evening stretched on as my mother and I talked, her voice thick with emotion as she recalled memories of my granddad teaching me to ride a bike, showing me how to plant tomatoes in the garden, slipping me candy when my dad was not looking. I remembered flashes of those days, the warmth of his hand, the kindness in his eyes. They had been buried under years of disappointment, but now they surfaced like light through water. When I finally drove home, the folder still beside me on the seat, I felt a steadiness in my bones I had not known in years. My dad might rage, he might threaten, he might try to twist the story as he always had, but I was not powerless, not anymore. The night was cool when I stepped into my apartment. I placed the folder carefully on my desk and stood there for a long while, just staring at it. It represented more than property or money. It represented the truth. Proof that I had been chosen, that I mattered. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt not just vindicated, but ready. Ready to face whatever storm my dad tried to summon next. By the end of that week, the story of what had happened was no longer contained within my family. Small towns have a way of carrying whispers faster than the wind, and Roseville was no different. It began with murmurs at church on Sunday, then spread through neighbors and eventually reached the pages of the local newspaper. I had not intended to make any of this public, but sometimes the truth has its own way of clawing to the surface. That morning I walked into the sanctuary of St. Mark's, the same church I had grown up in, and immediately felt the shift in the air. People glanced at me with curiosity that bordered on sympathy. I caught Pastor John's eyes from across the aisle and saw recognition there, a flicker that told me he already knew more than I wanted him to. My mother walked beside me, her hand brushing mine as if to remind me I was not alone. During the sermon, Pastor John spoke in his usual steady cadence, but there was an undercurrent I had not heard before. He spoke about integrity, about how families must be built on honesty and respect, not just appearances. He never said my dad's name, but I felt the weight of his words land heavy on the pews. My mother squeezed my hand, and when I glanced around, I noticed others shifting uncomfortably. Anthony's absence was louder than if he had been there. After service, a few women approached me near the steps. Martha Green, a longtime friend of my mother's, touched my arm gently and whispered that she admired my strength. Another woman murmured that they had always wondered why my dad seemed distant with me. Their words were kind, but the pity in their eyes made my stomach tighten. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Daniel Scott, a local journalist who had known my family for years. He said he had heard about the airport incident and wanted to understand my side before publishing anything. At first, I hesitated. The idea of bearing my wounds to the public felt unbearable. But then I remembered the way my dad had always controlled the narrative, painting himself as the devoted parent while I remained invisible. This time I would not let him own the story. Daniel came to my apartment with a notebook and recorder. He asked careful questions, giving me space to pause when emotions caught in my throat. I told him about booking the trip, about the money, about the message that had shattered me. I showed him the confirmation emails, each with my name, and even the screenshots of the group chat that proved they had plotted to cut me out. By the end, his expression was somber, his pen moving quickly across the page. When the article ran 2 days later, the headline struck me like a bolt. Daughter funds family trip, then is excluded by her dad. The piece was blunt but accurate. Daniel quoted my words about being erased, about reclaiming my power by canceling the bookings. He included statements from community members, some supportive, some stunned. The fallout was swift. My dad could no longer hide behind silence. His Facebook page is filled with comments, some demanding explanations, others defending me. Cheryl tried to post a smiling photo of them at a restaurant in Sacramento, but the comments underneath spiraled out of control. People called them selfish, ungrateful, cruel. At the grocery store, strangers stopped me to say they had read the article. Some offered quiet support, others asked questions I was not ready to answer. I felt exposed, but I also felt something I had never experienced before. The community that had once looked past me was finally seeing me. The hardest part was the ripple inside the church. Pastor John pulled me aside one evening after Bible study. His voice was gentle but firm. "Ruby, sometimes the truth is painful, but it also sets a new foundation. Do not let anyone shame you for standing on what is right." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Meanwhile, cracks began to show in my dad's new household. A neighbor mentioned seeing Cheryl leave the house in tears after a heated argument. Rumors spread that she blamed my dad for not anticipating my legal control. Ethan stopped posting cocky updates on social media. Instead, his silence spoke louder than words. I tried not to take satisfaction in their unraveling, but it was impossible not to feel the shift. For once, it was not me standing alone in the cold. It was them facing the weight of their own choices. One evening, my mother and I sat on her porch watching the sun set behind the trees. The air smelled faintly of jasmine. She turned to me and said softly that she had never seen Anthony so publicly humbled. He thrived on reputation, on being respected in the community. Losing that was a punishment he could never have imagined. I thought back to all the times I had begged for his attention, for even a sliver of acknowledgement. And here I was now, not only holding my ground but watching him face the consequences of his actions in the eyes of others. It was not vengeance in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter, more enduring, karma unfolding in plain sight. Still, the exposure weighed on me. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I had gone too far, if sharing my side with Daniel had crossed a line I would regret. But then I would remember the years of silence, of carrying the shame alone, and I knew the truth was the only way forward. The phone stayed mostly silent during those weeks. No more threats from my dad, no more cruel messages from Cheryl. Their silence was its own confession. Yet I knew this was not the end. The storm had only shifted form. My dad was a man who could not live without control. He might have lost the community's sympathy, but I doubted he would accept defeat so easily. That thought lingered as the days passed, a low hum in the back of my mind. Even as I found strength in the support of others, even as I began to believe in my own worth again, I knew another confrontation was waiting just beyond the horizon. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock on my apartment door. For a moment I thought it might be my mother or Carmen stopping by unannounced. But when I looked through the peephole, my heart lurched. My dad stood there, shoulders slumped, his face worn with something I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not arrogance, desperation. I opened the door slowly. He did not wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his hands stuffed awkwardly into the pockets of his windbreaker. For the first time in years, he looked smaller, as if the weight of his pride had been stripped away. "Ruby," he began, his voice uneven. "I need to talk to you." I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter. "Go ahead." He rubbed his forehead, searching for words. "Look, I know things have been rough between us, but you embarrassed me. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." I lost face at the church, at the paper, everywhere. I stayed quiet, waiting. He exhaled sharply. "I just want you to return at least the deposit money." "Not all of it, just something. Cheryl is furious, Ethan is sulking, and I cannot keep living with this tension. Please." The word please hung in the air, strange on his tongue. He had never used it with me before. Not when I was a child, begging him to attend my school play. Not when I was a teenager, asking him to remember my birthday. But now, after losing the trip and the community's respect, he said it. I looked at him carefully. "You chose them over me," I said softly. "You made it clear I am not your family. And now you want me to clean up the mess." His jaw tightened. "Ruby, I am still your dad." The laugh that escaped me was sharp and bitter. A dad does not erase his child. A dad does not use her credit score, her savings, her effort, and then cast her aside. He winced as if my words struck harder than he expected. For a moment he looked as though he might argue, but the fight drained from his eyes. Instead, he dropped into the nearest chair, his shoulders sagging. "I cannot fix what happened," he muttered, "but I am asking you for this." I studied him, searching for the man I had spent my whole life chasing. All I saw was someone stripped of his illusions, clinging to scraps of dignity. I thought of my granddad's will, of the legacy meant for me, not him. I thought of the years my mother had carried me through while he invested in someone else's family. I shook my head slowly. "No. The money is mine. You cannot demand it back. You made your choice." His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a mixture of shock and something close to fear. For once, I did not flinch. The silence stretched until he finally pushed himself to his feet. His voice cracked as he said, "You will regret this, Ruby." But even as he spoke, his shoulders gave him away. The threat rang hollow. He knew it, and so did I. I followed him to the door, my voice steady. "I do not regret standing up for myself, not anymore." He left without another word, his footsteps fading down the hall. I stood there long after the door closed, my body trembling with adrenaline. Yet beneath the shaking was a calm resolve. He had asked, he had begged, and I had said no. That was something I had never done before. The next morning, I logged into my bank account and saw the final refunds had cleared. The numbers glowed on the screen, proof that everything had come back to me. I stared at the balance for a long time, my heart swelling with the knowledge that the trip no longer belonged to him. It was mine to reshape. That afternoon, I drove to my mother's house. She was sitting on the porch with Martha Green and two other women from church, their voices carrying on the summer air. When they saw me pull into the driveway, they waved me over with warm smiles. I sat down with them, the air rich with the scent of lemonade and blooming roses. My mother looked at me with quiet curiosity, and I told them all about the refunds, about how the money was now free to use however I wanted. Martha clapped her hands together. "Ruby, you should still go to Hawaii." "Not with him, with people who love you." The idea landed softly at first, then grew louder in my mind. I glanced at my mother. She raised her eyebrows, hesitant. "I cannot ask you to spend it on me," she whispered. "You never asked," I reminded her. You have given everything for me without asking for a thing in return. Maybe it is time we take something for ourselves." Her eyes filled with tears. Martha squeezed her arm and chimed in that a trip with friends was exactly what we all needed. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest lighten with anticipation instead of dread. 2 days later, I sat at my laptop and rebooked the trip. Not for 7 people who never wanted me. This time for 5. My mother Martha, 2 other women from church, and me. Same dates, same resort, the same ocean breeze I had once imagined sharing with people who never saw me. Only now it would be ours. When the confirmations came through, I printed them out and placed them carefully on the kitchen counter. The sound of the printer whirring felt like a drumbeat of triumph. This was not just a vacation, it was a reclamation. As if on cue, an envelope arrived in the mail that evening from a law office in Roseville. I slid it open with cautious hands. Inside was a letter formally notifying me that my granddad's estate documents had been processed and the assets listed in his will were being transferred into my name. I sank into a chair, the paper trembling in my hands. The timing was uncanny, almost poetic. The same week my dad begged for scraps, I received proof that I had been entrusted with something lasting, something he could not touch. I sat there for a long while staring at the letter. The anger that had fueled me for weeks quieted into something steadier. Not triumph, not gloating, a deep recognition that I was no longer bound to him the way I once had been. That night, I called my mother and told her about the estate transfer. She wept softly over the phone, her voice breaking as she said that my granddad's love was still guiding me. I pressed the letter to my chest, letting the truth of it sink deep into my bones. For years, I had been chasing after a dad who never truly wanted me. Now, finally, I had chosen something different. I had chosen myself. The first morning in Maui felt like waking inside a dream I had built with my own hands. The balcony doors of our resort room stood open and the sound of the waves carried through like a steady heartbeat. The sky stretched wide and endless, painted in shades of pink and gold. My mother stood beside me, her hair loose in the breeze, tears glimmering in her eyes though she was smiling. Behind us, Martha and the other women laughed over the clatter of breakfast, trays their voices warm and full. I closed my eyes and let the air wrap around me. For weeks, my chest had felt heavy with dread and anger, but in that moment, the weight eased. I thought of all the times I had stood outside of my dad's world, aching to be let in. Now I was here without him, and it was better than I ever imagined. That first day, we wandered barefoot along the sand. The water was cool against our ankles, the foam curling around us like a gentle greeting. My mother reached for my hand the way she had when I was little. We did not speak much, but we did not need to. Every step said what words could not. Later, as the sun climbed higher, we joined a tour I had once booked for the family that never wanted me. The guide spoke with energy, pointing out the lush valleys and cliffs, and the women beside me listened with joy. I saw Martha lift her camera, capturing moments as if she knew how much they meant. I thought about how different this felt from what I had imagined before. Instead of tense silences and forced smiles, there was ease, laughter, and gratitude. That evening we gathered for the dinner cruise. The boat rocked gently as it pulled away from the dock, the smell of grilled fish rising from the deck. The sky deepened into orange and purple, and music drifted through the air. My mother sat close, her face soft in the glow of sunset. When she turned to me and whispered, "Thank you," I felt a rush of warmth that no approval from my dad could have ever matched. For days, we let ourselves sink into the rhythm of the island. We swam, we ate, we laughed. At night, I would step onto the balcony and listen to the ocean, letting its steady pull quiet the echoes of old wounds. The anger that had burned so hot inside me cooled into something else, a steady strength. A recognition of what I deserved and what I no longer needed. One afternoon, I found myself alone by the water, the tide pulling at the sand beneath my feet. I thought about my granddad's will, about the legacy he had left me. I thought about the look on my dad's face when I told him no. For so long, I had measured my worth by what he withheld, by what I could never quite earn. But standing there with the salt air clinging to my skin, I realized I no longer wanted his version of family. I wanted this. The people who showed up, who held my hand, who loved me without conditions. The trip ended too quickly, as vacations always do. On our last morning, my mother and I sat on the beach with coffee in hand, watching the waves roll in. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I knew she was remembering the years we had fought through together, the nights she had carried me when I felt invisible. I whispered to her that this was only the beginning. We would take more trips, build more memories, fill the spaces left by what we had lost. Back in Sacramento, the world felt different. The house I had once thought of as lonely no longer felt that way. It felt like mine, filled with the echoes of laughter that had traveled home with me. The folder from Carmen sat on my desk, a reminder of what my granddad had entrusted me with. The strength of that legacy steadied me when doubts crept in. My dad tried once more to reach out, a short message asking if we could meet, saying he wanted to explain. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. There was nothing left to explain. The past was what it was and the future belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on work, on building routines that made me feel strong. I spent weekends with my mother, with Martha, with the women who had joined me in Hawaii. Our bond had deepened in ways I had not expected. We were not just friends now. We were something closer to family, chosen family, bound not by obligation but by trust and care. Sometimes at night I thought about my dad, about the image of him slumped in that chair in my apartment, stripped of his pride. The memory no longer made me ache. It made me resolve never to let myself be diminished again. On quiet evenings, I would sit by the window with a journal, writing down the lessons the past months had carved into me. That love is not proven by sacrifice alone. That dignity comes from drawing boundaries, not from surrendering them. That sometimes family is not who shares your blood, but who shares your burdens. As summer turned to fall, I realized I was no longer chasing something out of reach. I was standing on my own ground. My mother's laughter filled my weekends, my work gave me purpose, and my granddad's legacy gave me security. Most of all, my own voice finally felt strong enough to carry without wavering. So if you are listening to my story now, know this. Justice does not always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in the quiet choice to say no. Sometimes it comes in reclaiming what was stolen. And sometimes it comes in choosing to walk away from those who cannot love you the way you deserve. I hope you carry that truth with you, and if you have a story of your own, I would love to hear it. Share it in the comments below. And if this journey meant something to you, remember to like this video and subscribe for more stories like mine. Together we can remind each other that no one is ever too small to stand tall again.